A new version of ClojureScript is out, and it has some interesting new features. Let's take a look. So this is a major feature release with a significant number of enhancements. The Google Clojure compiler has been updated. The ClojureScript developers maintain their own fork of the Google Clojure library, which is actively maintained by the Clojure team and the community. So the first big change is that ClojureScript will use ES6 now. And a big reason for that is it's been out for 9 years, and ES6 now offers great performance. ES6 also comes with new features, which allow new features in ClojureScript itself, as we'll see. The first of those is CLJS proxy, and this is a really clever alternative or replacement for CLJ to JS. If you've written any ClojureScript, you'll know that you often have to transform from native ClojureScript data structures back to JavaScript data structures. And that's especially true when you're doing interop with JavaScript libraries, or for example, sending JSON data over the wire. And basically, this is a bit inefficient. So CLJS proxy is a new experimental namespace that lazily bridges ClojureScript maps and vectors into JavaScript. So JavaScript code can now see ClojureScript maps as objects and vectors as array-likes. And David Nolan implemented this feature in a careful way that adds little overhead. We've got some example code here. Let's take it for a spin. So I've got a fresh machine here, and I've installed Clojure and Java and RL wrap and the other dependencies. And I've made a small script called CLJS, which just runs Clojure and calls CLJS main using that latest version of ClojureScript. And so I've run a node REPL, and when it comes up, we can see it's the right version. And so the first thing I'm doing here is requiring that builder function from cljs.proxy, and then I'm going to create the proxy. And then to use it, we create a ClojureScript hash map as per normal, and we're wrapping it in this proxy function call. So let's do that again, this time assigning it to proxmap. And if we print that out, it looks like a JavaScript object, and we can look up this key name here that we defined. And as you can see, we get Alice, which is the value we assigned to that. Same for age. Let's try one that doesn't exist. We get nil. Now, one thing to note here is this doesn't allow sort of a new mutation vector. If we try to set the name on proxmap and then get it again, we see that it's still Alice because the underlying object is still immutable. And because proxmap looks just like a JavaScript object, we can of course do things like json.stringify proxmap, and that JavaScript function will think that proxmap is just a regular JavaScript object. And so from the outside, it looks quite a lot like a more efficient form of CLJ to JS. And so the next feature is that ClojureScript now supports Clojure method values. And so that means you can use string.toUppercase and object/new in, say, a map, as with this example. And so our next feature is a really interesting one, refer global and require global. You may have run into this issue where you import a script tag in your HTML, and then to use that library that's been hoisted onto the global namespace, you have to use the JS/ prefix. With refer global, you can now import these JavaScript globals, and it'll treat them as if they were required like any other library. And that means you can use them without any further build configuration. And so if you're someone who likes minimal builds and bringing things in on script tags, this provides a sort of cleaner way to do it. And now we come to the last major feature in this release, which is light mode and allied to string. So light mode is a new compiler flag that basically lets you make smaller ClojureScript builds by swapping out the ClojureScript data structures for the original data structures. And in addition, the allied to string compiler flag removes the two string implementations, which you only really need if you're recursively printing EDN, which many programs obviously don't. And so you can cut your initial artifact size by 2/3 if you use these flags. And so here's an example of a program that compiles down to 6K using light mode and allied to string. So let's try this out by creating some small ClojureScript files and seeing how they compile down. So the first one I'm going to do is just a simple console.log. And so I'm going to go ahead and do an advanced compilation build for the browser, and the resulting output will be tiny.js. And so we can take a look at tiny.js, and as you can see, it's only 2.5K for this tiny little program to be compiled. And if we gzip that, it comes out at 1K. So now let's look at what happens if we add a native data structure. So we'll add a native data structure there instead. And let's run our compilation again with the same parameters. And as you can see, as soon as we've added that native data structure, it's blown out our size to 86K and 19K gzipped. So let's compile our tiny.cljs with our native Clojure data structure in there. We're still going to target the browser and use advanced optimizations, but this time we're also adding some compiler options. We're setting light mode to true and allied string to true. And so as you can see, we end up with a much smaller artifact this time of only 26K, and that's only 6.6K compressed, which is very small for a ClojureScript artifact using native data structures. And so that's been a quick review of the latest ClojureScript release, CLJS proxy, refer global, and light mode. I hope that's been useful, and thanks for watching.